Hello everyone, welcome back to the Bassidominus Comic Vault. I'm Captain Logan, and joining me today is my buddy Kareem. Hello, Kareem.
Hi, everybody.
Kareem chose today's book, and Kareem, I've been at this for 10 years, doing the Vault for almost that long, and can you believe that I have never tackled All-Star Superman on this show?
I could have sworn you guys did it.
Well, you know, it's funny because I didn't go back and check. I guess it's possible and I just forgotten because we've done so much stuff, but I don't think we've ever had a lengthy discussion of any kind on All-Star Superman. I did talk about the movie when it came out, of course, but yeah, I don't think I've ever just sat down and talked about this before. And I invited Kareem on and said, "What do you want to talk about?" And he was like, "Well, my favorite thing is All-Star Superman." And I was like, "Well, yeah, let's do that. Let's go to Kareem's cream of the crop, so that it can only go downhill from there." Kareem, this book is... Sorry, you froze up on me for a minute. This book is newer than I remembered it. I forgot this was as recent as 2010.
Yeah, I think it ended in 2010. It started, I want to say 05 or 06.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was just looking at the date on DC Universe. I didn't, go do research, and I was like, surely it didn't start in 2010.
Or that might have been, because I haven't seen the movie.
Did it take them that long to finish it?
Yeah.
Was it late?
This was because this was what, 12 issues, 13 issues?
12, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was late, but by that time I wasn't even reading this stuff. I had read this way after it ended, and I had discovered Grant Morrison through this, but I fell in love with this story.
Interesting. And have you read a ton of Morrison since then?
Yeah, he's my favorite writer in comics, actually.
Yeah, the movie was 2011. Surely, no, 5 to 8. I don't know why DC Universe has this listed as 2010. That's really weird. That is just wrong. It's just incorrect. Maybe that's when the Absolute came out. I don't know, but
yeah. I own the Absolute too.
Of course you do. It's a pretty book. I've seen that. I've never read it that way, but
it's gorgeous. Quietly puts his heart and soul in this stuff.
Now, does Quietly have a reputation for being late? Because I didn't remember that about him.
I'm not sure. I know when the two of them get together, they take their time.
Sure.
Quietly is the Kirby of Stan Lee's, other half. So him and Grant Morrison go hand in hand all the time. So I'm sure they just took their time. And even Multiversity, if you read that, Quietly took a couple years to make that.
Well, was that all him? I thought that was various artists.
Yeah, it was various artists, but his Watchmen, I forget the name of it. Pax Romana?
Yeah.
Yeah, it took a while for him.
Well, I mean, worth it, obviously. And I'm not complaining that this was late. I just didn't remember that about it. But only 3 years. It wasn't 6. This would be like DC Universe for whatever would lead you to believe. So yeah, I had only read this once, and it's been a good long time. And of course, I loved it, like most everybody that's read this. And I always remembered this as a very quintessential Superman thing, and as I kind of, it's weird because it being Morrison, he's got that reputation for being very strange and not especially accessible to people that especially aren't used to comics and aren't used to the wild super science he likes to do. And a lot of that stuff is here, but for Morrison, it's somewhat reined in, and it's a real straightforward piece, and it's pretty easy to read, even though some of the wild, big ideas are, kind of head-breaking, and you're like, what? Wow, how did you come up with that? That's crazy. And Morrison seems to do that every 4 or 5 pages, where it's like, did you just have a notebook from when you were a little kid that you've just been adding to all that time, and you just flip to a random page and you go, I'm going to bring this out finally now, because I don't see how some of those weird super science things he comes up with are things that you come up with just while you're writing a story. You'd think that you would have some of that in your back pocket, but this is, I think, one of, if not the easiest stories to just hand a person that doesn't understand how like what a good Superman story is, or thinks that Superman stories are difficult to tell. It's like,
Right.
well, here's and this has, I think, kind of become like Killing Joke or Long Halloween for Superman, where it's one of the three things anybody can mention, but it's deserving of it in a way sometimes
Yeah.
those things with other characters are not.
Yeah. And as a follower of Morrison, I could say, he always has these kind of tropes, these like weird out there ideas that he just puts into his personal work, and then creator own work, and then the like superhero work and stuff like that. I think a lot of it that's accessible comes from the character, because Superman is such a simple idea, and I think it kind of channels a lot of these complex ideas that Grant Morrison always has in his works. So like, I've known people that are like, I can't handle Morrison. He doesn't make any sense, and love this story because it's just a simple, Superman gets cancer, and he has to, focus on what to do afterwards. It's just a straightforward kind of story, but so poignant. But I could relate to, turning the couple pages and just having your mind blown. Like, how do you even think of that?
Well, and what I love about his take with Lex Luthor is to piggyback off of what you just said, he makes his villain in this, in my mind, like a non-Superman fan, like a comic book reader who doesn't get Superman, where it's like I don't understand what's cool about him and why people would follow him and see him as a superhero. Everything comes to him too easily. He's too powerful. Like, this Lex is saying all the things that people who don't think Superman is cool are saying, and that's one of the reasons I think it's cool to hand it to people that don't think Superman is cool. It's like, well, they cast you as the villain, and then this is why Superman is actually a neat character, but also somebody that is not only to be looked up to, but is somewhat relatable. Everything doesn't come to Superman easily in this. I wouldn't want to be Superman dealing with some of the things he's having to deal with in this book.
That's such an interesting point. I never thought of it like that. But obviously Lex is just the worst of Superman's supposed to be the best of humanity. And Lex is supposed to be the worst of us, the jealousy and the vanity and all that stuff. Lex is brilliant in this story.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite Lexes.
Yeah. And I just love the way he finally, killed Superman. It's kind of like overloaded his cells when he was going into the sun. I was like, that's such a genius way to put it. But yeah, I think Lex, and I love the issue where it introduces him on trial, and they're like listing all these dictators and stuff, and they're like, you describe these people as the ones that you look up to. Like, that is Lex to a key. Like,
yeah, one of the things that's really cool about this book, and Morrison does this to various degrees in a lot of stuff, but I think his passion for Golden and Silver Age comes out here harder than it does, as much or harder than anywhere else. He takes the really goofy, wild, silly stuff and then wraps it in a sophisticated story with characters who have some dimension. And but it's also, it manages to still have that flavor throughout. He's got it, and I don't remember a lot of other Morrison stuff that has as much love for extra media stuff as this is, like as this does, because this also loves Donner. And when Lex is talking about all the, or when all the dictators are listed, because it reminds me of that Lex, and I could totally imagine the Donner version saying that. And I love how in that scene you think it's going to be just a comparison, like you are just as bad as these guys, and then it turns into, no, you admire these people and think that you should be like them. And Lex in this is, I don't want to say he's not interesting and complex, but he also is still your kind of golden age supervillain. He still gets to be kind of just straight up evil, and yet also interesting, and not everybody can pull that off. And that's a really impressive thing that Morrison is able to do.
Yeah, and I think Lex gets some nuance towards the end, which we'll talk about. But as far as the Donner stuff, the way Quietly draws Clark Kent is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Like his head is kind of slumped over, and he kind of looks a little overweight and stuff. And you would never guess that guy was, Superman, who stands straight up and is totally calm. Uh, and I forgot to mention my favorite part about the story is the cover. Like the issue of the first cover, you always imagine Superman as this strong, monolithic kind of built character, but he's just the calmest kind of person depicted here, almost like a benign god almost.
Yeah.
And there's a funny story about that, which I don't know if I should tell now if we're
No,
still
you might as well. Go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, but Morrison always wanted to create a Superman story, and it was supposed to be called Superman Tomorrow back in the 90s. And he was just looking for a way to kind of reboot the character. And I think he was with Mark Waid at a con one time, and there was a cosplayer who was in a Superman costume, and he didn't look like a cosplayer. Like, he looked straight up like Superman walked out, and he just sat down just like the cover. And he was like, and suddenly Morrison was like, "That's how you do Superman." Like, he's like the calmest guy, because if you were all powerful, you wouldn't have to showboat or anything.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like the perfect kind of vision of what Superman is. He's just calm and just kind. I think kind more than anything.
Well, I didn't know that story. That's cool.
Yeah.
If the point is to set the example, then you don't want to like lord over everybody, because then you'd be missing the point.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing people miss most about Superman is he's post-human, he's superhuman, but that doesn't just mean the physical part. It means, like, for lack of just being kind of corny, like what's inside of us, the best of us, like what we can be intellectually, what we can be, as far as peace is concerned. And I think he just nails that. Like, he's almost like a Renaissance man in this story.
Yeah, and you have to do the yin yang thing. You have to have characters that embody the opposite of that in order to prove that point. And I think that issue with the Kryptonians that show up and don't understand why Superman doesn't just take over everything is really important, because, again, it's easy for people to just say, well, of course Superman can be the best of us because look at all the physical things he's able to do, and he's perfect, and it's easy for him. But being benign and kind and not lording over people and being a god I would think be the hardest part of that job.
Yeah.
Especially because if you're Superman, you can't stop people from worshiping you. I was like to go back to what happens in Death of Superman right after Superman dies during the World Without Superman period, where you have different factions that are worshiping Superman as unto a god. And I think if somebody like Superman actually existed, and especially if he had the values Superman does, people would worship him because he looks like the second coming. But but the whole point is, I'm not the second coming. I realize that I'm an extreme and of like physical ability and prowess, and if I can do these things, you can't go out and like leap tall buildings and save people the way I can, but if I can be a good person and not ruin people's lives with these powers, with what little power you have, maybe you also can do that. But the really interesting internal conflict with Superman is always, am I doing too much and taking something away from humanity? By doing that. And so, which is why World Without Superman is always more interesting to me than World with Superman. If Superman leaves, did we learn anything? And this also, of course, plays with that a little bit. And I mean, you don't really get to see what the world is like for very long at the end of this, after Superman is gone, and there's that question of whether or not he's dead. It's very Neo in the Matrix, right? Like, is he coming back, or like is he gone? And I really like that there's no follow-up to this. I think it would be a really bad idea to make a sequel to this book, but
yeah, I mean, I have the same
I'm not
point.
saying it couldn't be done, but I never wanted that.
Yeah. Well, so we mentioned the Golden Age and Silver Age stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's an awesome line in here that's like referencing Metropolis, like gangsters or something. I was like, that's a Golden Age thing. And then the Bottle City of Candor, and then the Fortress of Solitude stuff. I mean, Grant Morrison, I think, and he does this with Batman. I don't know if you ever read his Batman, but he asks the question of, what if it all happened?
Yeah,
and he
exactly.
takes all of the history and just makes it, this contemporary kind of story. And you're
But
never
here
like,
even more literally, because none of
oh
it
yeah,
is an acid trip. It actually happened.
yeah, yeah. The '50s weren't an acid trip to this Superman. Um, yeah,
And he
but
loves that stuff, and he's not making fun of it. Going all the way as far as to including it on the covers. Like, some of these covers, and they're not all that way, but some of these covers are Golden Age covers, where you have a real weird, trippy, strange situation with a lot of dialogue on the cover, and then, just like in those books, you flip it open, and that's actually what's going on in the book. Like, it's really happening. But you don't have to go as far as some of those books did and like get out of continuity and do imaginary stories, because he's just doing an out of continuity thing. Although, even though some of those weird things happen, and I feel like ever since then, we've kind of allowed Superman to go to more of those places. Like you mentioned the Bottle City of Candor and stuff like that. Yeah, we do that now. I mean, that comes back a lot. To be fair, one of the other big times we did it was Morrison again with New 52. But
yeah, the Action Comics.
Yeah, but we and Crypto the Superdog and stuff like that. Like we have continued to bring that, and of course Hush did that. Like we've continued to come back and try to integrate those things in more sophisticated stories. And you probably have Morrison to thank for some of that. But very often we tend to be, unless it's Morrison, and I don't mean he's the only one that does this well, but very often we tend to be a little bit too like self-aware and flippant about it, where like somebody's got to comment on it, somebody's got to make some kind of a joke about it.
Yeah.
And Morrison just says, this is just what the world looks like. Like this is what Superman used to be, and why can't we still have those kinds of weird elements in a relatively serious story?
Yeah, I've always considered, because we know the British invasion of comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. I always considered Alan Moore to be the deconstructionist of superheroes, and Morrison to be the reconstructionist. Like he literally pairs them up. And Alan Moore says, what would happen if these larger-than-life people were in our world? And Morrison says, we need to be in their world. Yeah. We need to live in their world. So yeah, I think it comes naturally, and this is part of the reason why this is probably my favorite superhero story of all time, is because there's such a reverence for what these characters can be. And I don't know if you know this, but this is like my favorite issue, when I forget it's issue 10 or something, when Superman's just going around the world and recording his thoughts, and there's this suicidal teen, and she's about to commit suicide. She's about to jump, and Superman comes behind her and he tells her, you're much stronger than you think you are. Yeah. And he doesn't save. That's what Superman is. He didn't save her. He said, you're stronger than what you think you are. Yeah. And I remember Morrison said he scripted that, and they printed it, and he got loads of emails from people, like teenagers, that are like, you saved my life with this. Wow. And then
that's great.
And then he said, what is this idea on paper that is saving people? It's doing exactly what he was meant to do. It's like these characters are almost realer than us, really. And you know how Morrison's kind of weird, but it made sense. It made sense, and it was really kind of like, wow, these are powerful ideas and stuff, and it made me respect what Superman is.
Yeah, and I love what you said about construction, about reconstructing versus deconstructing. That, like, you can break this down, and you can, of course, deconstruct this book, and you can talk about all the ways in which this is quintessential Superman and takes us back to basics and strips it down to its nuts and bolts. But the story itself is not trying to deconstruct anything. It's just presenting this idea in its purest form.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. And even the way the stories are kind of woven, I mean, these are 12 issues, and it's kind of like he feels like a Greek myth almost, but humanized. Yeah. And like we said, benign and kind, which I feel like, a lot of people, like you said, a lot of writers are intimidated by this character. Kevin Smith famously is like, well, how do you write for Jesus? He can do anything. And it's really about because I love that issue where he watches his dad die.
Yeah.
And like you said, the Donner version had the same thing. It's like what happens? What can Superman do if a person has a heart attack? It's every person he can't save. It's everything he can't do. With Batman, it's kind of I fight darkness all day. What happens if the darkness pulls me towards it? Superman is like what else can I do? How can I get them? How can I make the bridge for them? And that's kind of the drama of the character, I feel like.
Yeah, I think, and I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus when I say this, but I think that there's some cynicism to immediately jumping the gun and saying Superman's unrelatable because nobody like him can exist. And I always, this is becoming more and more the obvious example, but of course one of my personal heroes, Fred Rogers, that's who I always go to. I'm like, if that guy can exist, Superman can exist. He was as close to Superman as you get without superpowers. And people that think that he's hard to write or hard to appreciate even when he's written well, I think that says something about your worldview.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I've met people who walk into a room and you just feel warm. They're just kind and stuff. It's not, just because arguably we're in a more cynical time, it doesn't mean there are people that you kind of roll your eyes at. Look at Captain America on screen. No one is laughing at that. Yeah. And he's a Boy Scout. He may be a soldier and stuff, but I think you just need the right kind of creators to make this character spark. Saying Superman is outdated is kind of like saying idealism or hope is outdated.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, and I think the distinction is, can a person like this exist, or do they? And I think people who don't think that there is anybody like that right now will look at Superman and say, well, like and again, it's kind of cynical, but they'll say, well, it's sad. I wish this could happen, but I don't believe it does because I don't turn on the news, open a web browser every day and see that, and that makes it more important and poignant. But it also makes it harder to pull off believably, because it's really easy to be super sappy and corny with a thing like this. You have to make it about, and this book does this, and we should win this back around, of course, to All-Star, but like, you have to make it about the character and not the world itself. So, like, the world can and should be influenced by Superman, by a guy who's able to do these things, but you can write a world that looks more or less like the one that we live in and still let this guy be in it. At the moment that nobody questions Superman, that nobody is afraid of a guy with those kind of powers, that nobody is again, cynical and thinks that he needs to be taken down a peg, that's when it's silly, that's when it's corny, that's when it's unbelievable. In this particular day and age especially, like, that kind of thing you could have gotten away with a little bit more back with Fleischer's time. But now, I think you can do like Superman's story set in a cynical world, but Superman cannot be the thing that's cynical about it. And if everybody is as perfect and kind-hearted as Superman, then first of all, that's not the world we live in, and second of all, what's the point? Like, we need to see stories with him in the world we live in where everybody rolls their eyes at him and doesn't think that he can exist. And it also, most importantly, has to be hard. And I think in this story it is hard. I don't think it's easy for Clark to be Superman, but I also think that he likes being Superman.
Yeah, and I think the first issue we're introduced to, he's dying. I think that adds a certain urgency to kind of his mission, the dream of Superman. And you have some really tender kind of moments in this where he gives Lois Lane, her superpowers and stuff like that. He goes to Zabaro, the Underverse and stuff.
Yeah, he's great.
I love that stuff. But yeah, it's
and a weirdly tragic character. Like, imagine if you were that guy, where like you were born on Bizarro World and you're the outcast because you're a normal person. And you don't look down at everybody. You're like upset because you're not like everyone else, and you wish that you were talking like the Bizarros. It's really interesting.
And it's so sad. He's like, read my poetry, please. It's kind
Yeah,
of
and
the
then later on,
reverse
Superman
Superman
has
origin.
the poetry and he saved it. I can't remember
Yeah,
if it's in his will. Is it in his will?
I forget.
I can't remember, but anyway.
But yeah, you have so much, and the art really lends to the story. It's so kinetic and stuff. That the first image where he's like under the sun and he just has his hands like drawn out is just gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
It's the kind of thing that, for me, requires this context, because some of these panels outside of the book, I probably wouldn't love. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Quietly Superman face. It's a little too blocky for me, and he does that same thing, not to the same extent, but he does that same thing that Chris Burnham does in some of his faces, where they're a little bit like amorphous and blobby, and I don't love that. But the inks and colors help a lot. Like, this is it's funny because when Burnham does it, and I'm thinking specifically Morrison's Batman. It's funny, he works with two artists that draw faces like that. But when Burnham does it, it tends to look kind of like almost creepy and unsettling. And in this, it would look that way if it weren't for the coloring. So like, it's this really bright, chipper, optimistic book. I mean, there's some weird, strange, creepy stuff that happens in this book, but overall, it is an optimistic book. But I don't know, maybe it needs that kind of edge to sell it a little bit, and for it to be like a modern throwback to Golden Age, maybe it requires kind of some odd rendering. But I don't know about you, like, I'm not a big fan of his faces, but it works in the context of this.
Yeah, I agree. I like Quietly. I think he's great on certain projects. His faces can be, his art period can be really sketchy.
Yeah.
But here it looks cleaned and stuff. I don't know if it's just because I rebought the trade. I own the Absolute, but it's in storage. But the Absolute looks like.
Oh, so you didn't get to read it that way this time?
No, I read it on like a little trade and then my phone. But I've read this a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's also some feature in this.
Where specifically?
Just with how Clark is.
Yeah.
I love that his feet are just like they're like not even facing the right way. They're like bow-legged. He just feels like a Kansas guy. You know what I mean? Like he moved to the city and the city is too cramped and stuff, and he needs space. I normally don't like the bumbling, oafish Clark. But
yeah, I was going to ask you what your thoughts were usually on that take. I think it has to be done that way here. Again, partly because he's trying to be so traditional.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a throwback. It's kind of a love letter to Silver Age stuff.
Yeah.
So I think you have to put it in there. I think if I were to find a flaw in the story, I would want more emotion out of Lois. There was some, and I love when Superman flies off, and he tells her, I love you, but I would like more of a, oh my God, you're dying, kind of stuff.
I agree with that. She doesn't emote a lot, and I mean, like, it's difficult, right? Because she is a professional and she's used to bad news and she's used to difficult situations. But this is a Clark and Lois that are on the brink of. Like, not only is he going to die, but he would ask her to marry her. Like, they're in that place. Or at least Superman and Lois are in that place. If Superman asked her to marry her, she probably says yes. And so, yeah, you would think that she would emote a little bit more about that. Did you buy... Because... I'm of two minds about this. I'm conflicted about it because the bumbling thing really helps sell Lois doesn't believe they're the same person, which I think is a lot of fun. That's kind of a fun spin on the old, like, Clark is trying to keep it a secret, and she keeps almost stumbling on the secret, and here he's trying to tell her, but she just doesn't believe him because it's so preposterous, it's so ridiculous. Do you think the book takes that a little too far, or do you buy it?
Only reason I buy it. Yeah, the only reason I buy it is, like I said, this is like, a gumbo pot of Silver Age stuff. So I'm fine with I'm fine with Lois just being a Pulitzer Prize winner and just like that's not the same guy. And even after he says like, dude, it's me, she's like, nah.
Because you said there's some Fleischer in this. With her, she's like the black and white Adventures of Superman version.
Yes. And she put herself in trouble with the robot dude.
Yeah.
What's his name? Piano Man or something like that.
I wasn't sure what his name was, and every time they said it, I couldn't tell if they were like joking and making up a disparaging name or if that was actually his name.
I thought that was Toy Man.
Oh, okay, sure.
But I don't think it was.
One thing I want to mention, we should have said this probably up top, is that this is, of course, a complete story beginning, middle to end. It's got a great, like you said, occasion for story, initial impetus. Superman's powers are what's killing him go, which is just a really great, fine dramatic concept in the first place. But it's also 12 standalone stories. It's begin, middle to end, but this reads great month to month. Take some time away from each of these, and they read really fine by themselves. Morrison has always had, and some of his stuff reads more like chapters of a book, and some of it reads more like this. But Morrison's always had a really good sense of issue to issue storytelling and getting a lot done in a single comic, and appreciates the form of single issue storytelling. And so I feel like part of the mission statement of this is not just re-explain why Superman is cool and taking it back to basics, but also kind of throwing us like 12 of the coolest Superman things, just like major Superman elements. Like if you experience this, you've really experienced what Superman is, and not just the character, but also the mythology and things of that world. So we got to get Krypton in there. You got to get, Bottle City Candor and Jor-El and all of that stuff. But we managed to do all of those things without going back to origin at all. There's no origin, and I think he's kind of making a point with the first page being basically thing you know. We're done with that now.
Yeah, the first page is just like desperate scientists. Let's get over it. It's kind of like the Incredible Hulk, the Ed Norton movie.
Yeah,
it's like the opening credits, like
gets it out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what that is. And even when we go to Krypton and we do Kryptonians, I can't get a great handle on exactly what version this is. Like, they could be the kind of sterile John Byrne version, but they might not be that either. I'm not totally sure, and I don't think it's important, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did you get some Man of Steel movie vibes from this?
A little bit, yeah. But then Man of Steel was grabbing heavily from Byrne also.
Yeah, because I think they took a line from Jor-El, just his monologue of, they'll race behind you, they'll stumble. I think that it comes from this. And even there's a line from The Dark Knight that came from this. I don't know if this is a common saying, but what is it? It's like when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force.
Yeah, but I mean that's a popular saying.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. But I was just like, whoa.
Sure, but the speech that you're talking about, I forgot about the race behind you line. You're right, and that must have come directly from this. But then that's one of the big places where it's also harkening back to Donner, because some of the Brando stuff that's in this is directly from that.
Yeah. This is kind of like an amalgam of, like you said, all that's great with Superman. If you don't get the character, you'll read this, and even if you don't appreciate it, you'll understand who Superman is.
Yeah, and it works on a couple of levels, right? Because it reads kind of like Superman 101, like that. Like, there's no prerequisite for this. But then if you're, a big Superman fan and really familiar with it, it takes a lot of things you've seen before and does them way better.
Oh, yeah. I don't like to be like, this is like the best and this is the, summit of Superman, but it kind of, it's the best. It's the summit of Superman.
It's hard to be hyperbolic with this book. I think it is that good. I don't know if I like it as much as you, because to like it as much as you, I have to like it more than anything that's ever come out. So I don't know if I have that. I don't know if I put this above JMS's Earth One. think they're kind of fighting, and I think that's a little bit unfair because Earth 1 is, well, is it longer? Surely page count it's got to be longer. Because I mean,
the Earth 1 trilogy, or just the first one?
No, the trilogy. Because it is one story. Like, it's a 3-act story. Well, maybe they're really close. I don't know. Because this is 12 issues, normal page count, 22, 23 pages, and those were like 80-page graphic novels. So I'm actually not sure.
Earth 1 is brilliant too.
But I have a hard time putting this above that, but it's kind of unfair to compare them because they're doing very different things, of course. They're still pretty optimistic pieces, but that is starting Superman from a little bit more of a cynical "what if he was raised," like in our world kind of place, and then gets him to Superman later, and this one more kind of starts that way. But anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to get my bearings with you because you say this is like cream of the crop, and you're afraid of sounding hyperbolic. I'll try to sound less hyperbolic and say it's not the best thing, but it's like really, really, really close.
I don't think it's the best thing, to be clear. It's my favorite superhero story. It's mine.
If it's gonna lose people anywhere, especially folks that aren't used to reading Morrison, it's gonna be that last issue. It's that last issue gets a little bit weirder. It's hard to really tell what's happening in the Jor-El dreamscape. Maybe he's dead, maybe he's not thing. I don't like my biggest criticism of this book is that last issue where some of that I think goes a little bit farther off the deep end than it needs to, and I also think beating Lex with gravity is maybe a little too easy. But
I was going to ask you about the weird stuff at the end, because I took it as we're building him up to be this kind of sun god.
Yeah.
And he kind of became that because they have I don't know if it's the Legion of Superheroes, but the futuristic, his friends, his different versions.
Yeah.
It comes in one of those issues, and they say he does, I forget, like 12 feats or something like that. And he does them by the end, and he becomes this kind of deity, but not this, like you said, over-looming kind of god that we're used to, kind of a kind, almost next stage level Renaissance god.
That's a really interesting way to put it. And he would, and what's important is he wouldn't agree with you on it. Like, he is just by definition that, but he would never put himself above anybody else. Where it's like maybe he's destined to do that. Destined in the sense that the foregone conclusion of Superman doing the right thing is going to be he's going to wind up that way. Like, his self-sacrifice leads him to that godhood, right? But he wouldn't say he's any better than anybody else, and I also think that he's given some humanity with the mortality of, okay, I've got these great powers and they kind of make me godlike, but they are what kills me. So then it's also the very classic your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness thing. And so, like, it's almost this contradictory thing, right? Where, like, by definition, Superman is both a god but also cannot be a god, because the thing that makes him a god is also the thing that makes him immortal. Immortal,
but I think
immortal.
I think it's a little too meta, and I think that's probably why because I don't know if you finished his Batman. His Batman's like that. Yeah. It ends very meta.
I have. I've read that stuff. I haven't read enough of the early parts of it, but I have read.
We're doing that.
Yeah, we should. And I've threatened it for years to finally go through all that.
But I took it as more of a meta statement. Like, we obviously have the A story, but the meta statement is kind of like he becomes the sun. We need the sun to survive. And I don't know if you know this. Like, I just found this out.
That's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
Like, like our cells, there's a vitamin D or something like that where it affects our mood. Like, it makes us happy. And it's kind of, we're all kind of mini Superman. So I kind of took it as that, an A story, and then the kind of meta story of, he is the light of our world.
But I also like the idea that the ambiguity of, will he be up there forever? So you have this kind of out of, he's he's a god, but he's not a god, because like
Well, I have a
just
theory.
if he just became the sun, and like if Superman leaves, you have no sun. Like if we did that, then he's just kind of stuck in that place. And then then we physically require Superman to survive, which is such a cool idea. I didn't even think about it like that, but you're absolutely right. Where it's like, in order to get his powers, Superman needs the sun, and then we can get to a place where we need Superman. That's pretty great. And then like it kind of sucks that he has to do that, because that is a sacrifice he makes, even though it makes him seem like the grandest, greatest, most important being that ever lived. Like if you have to be that, you don't get to live a life. You're not like you're not human. You don't get to be a person. But Superman lives for others. So if he has to die, that would be like the greatest, compliment to him and the best thing to make him have to do. So like everything about that is fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of ways you can read it, and even what I was mentioning earlier with the I don't know if they're the Legion of Superheroes or not, but the group of futuristic Superman.
Yeah, I don't think they are. Maybe one or two of them. The unknown Superman I've seen in other things, and I know he comes from the future, and maybe he is Legion, but they're not all. I don't think they're all Legion. I don't think that Mixoplick guy is Legion.
No, I don't think so. But one of them is Gold, and I kind of took it as that was the post-Superman at the end coming back and saying, I'm here. And even there's a theory
really
that the super scientist in the beginning that's like kind of gathering a piece of the sun, Leo Quintum. Yeah, there's a theory that is Lex, because at the end when he gets his powers and he sort of cries and he sees how Superman sees the world, and he has this kind of epiphany of like, oh my God, we're all in this together. And Superman kind of defeats him. After that, there's a theory that, he travels back to the past or whatever and becomes the benign Lex, the one that wants to help humanity and stuff. And there's theories where you could break down Quietly's work and stuff, and the way he's kind of
really
positioned with his hands behind his back and stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's not in the book, so you can't say for sure that that's what's happening. But it tracks. It's not. I can't immediately think of anything that would contradict it, and I can think of things that thematically and character-wise would help to support it. You've got that one flash of humanity with Lex at the end where he seems to understand Superman for like 6 seconds and then immediately loses it. Where like
I love that.
It's wonderful. Where he tears up and he says, "Oh, I understand you now. We're all in this together." And then he kind of loses that moment of clarity, and it's almost like a Flowers for Algernon thing, but in like microcosm, just like real quick. And so you have that where like if he came to that again, through this experience and down the road, maybe he would go back and become the Quantum guy. And then there was another thing that made me think of that. I guess just the fact that also shortly thereafter in that same scene, when he keeps throughout this talking about how he could save the world if only people didn't care about Superman and he was allowed to, and Superman finally quelches that and says, look, if you really cared about that, you would have done it already. If that's what you wanted, you would have done that already. And if that's a Lex who finally says, I care more about this than I do about destroying my enemy. So it's hard not to want that to be what it is. Like that's really cool.
It's it's not, this story is not above that weird stuff, because
there's
even an issue that Superman creates this himself in our world. Like, it shows the...
which is so Morrison, and I wasn't sure what exactly to make of that. And it's weird to do that in the middle of your series, right? Like, you'd think that would be the end. You'd think it would be like Roger Rabbit drawing Daffy Duck, but it's not that. It's we get another issue after that.
But again, I think it's like a meta thing of this character really is kind of a cultural organism, and it's kind of shifting beyond its creators and outliving them and transforming with the times. With the 30s.
isn't it really important to talk about Superman in this as the idea, while at the same time you're also making a case for him as a relatable character? Because a lot of people get the importance of Superman before they see him as interesting to read about, and like as a character they would want to follow. And so this book acknowledges that, and in that, going really far meta sort of way, where it's like Superman is a transcendent idea that goes beyond the page.
And I think it's all a matter of just perspective, and having, like I said, the right creators behind it. I think the drama is there, and there are, like you said, good people, and the concept of the ultimate immigrant. Not to get political, but it's such a indelible part of our time right now.
Yeah.
And the idea of an all-American kid from Kansas, I think, can work. You just got to have the right people behind it. I think Superman fights the impossible, and Batman fights death, and nightmares and stuff like that. And these characters are opposed in separate spectrums, and I think a lot of these creators kind of mixed the two because Batman's more trendier. But I think this story, remembers that this guy started this whole thing. This character started this whole thing, and this is where everything comes from. And I love how sci-fi this story is.
Me too. Yeah. I love how vulnerable we make Superman, while the first thing we do, like one of the very first things that happens in this is he's no longer affected by kryptonite. And that's great. And that's Morrison's making a statement with that, right? Where he's like, yeah, not only is the kryptonite thing too easy, but also that's one of the first things that people that don't like Superman that much will lob at it. Where it's like, well, you have to have this real easy MacGuffin device in order to this plot device in order to have him have any adventures at all, and then you just take that away from him at his most vulnerable. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's also a Morrison thing. In Batman, it's the optimum, at his peak Batman. In New X-Men, Professor X is like, this is my most creative, mood right now. He always likes to make his characters, the quintessential version of them.
No, you're right. It is it does make a big deal out of how sci-fi is like at the core of Superman, but real out there super science.
Yeah. Just the key that weighs like a quintillion amount of pounds.
That was the biggest thing that stuck with me from this. And then those other Kryptonians show up and they're like, why would you leave that out? Like, we just got in, you're stupid.
I love that they're just having dinner in the Titanic.
Yeah, and with the menus from the Titanic.
Yes,
the same meals that they had on the ship. Yeah, it's great. And I guess that juxtaposition is really fun, and a thing that Donner played with a little bit in his movies too, where Superman was again raised by really regular people and sees himself as human and sees himself as just another one of us, but it is impossible to look at him that way completely. As much as he would want you to, he's able to do all these amazing things, not just like all the powers he has, but all the things that he knows about and the things that he's seen. He lives in a world that is much grander than the one you and I live in, but doesn't want. But so it's all about perception, right? He doesn't want to be seen as better than us, because then we're not going to learn anything from him. And also, he doesn't get to be a person and live a life. But if you're Superman, and if you're able to go have dinner on the Titanic or whatever, you're living a different kind of life.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail. Man, I think that's the key. Is we forget that he was just a regular guy, and he has friends, and he grew up, with a human family, and he considers himself, not this larger than life person, even though he is, but just a guy. And I think that makes him different than a lot of the characters. Is he does the same things we do, just on a grander scale, and that's what the allegory is. He walks his dog, but it's by the moon. you
Yeah.
know, and he has friends.
And his
but they're
dog
from
has
the future.
superpowers, and
Yeah. It's larger than life kind of myth building, and I think that's the key to the character.
It's really interesting that those Kryptonians that show up and try to take over are not just do they not understand why Superman cares about people, that General Zod and Ursa thing, but they're like offended by it.
Yeah, they're like, how dare you? It's almost like the Man of Steel thing. Not to keep mentioning that, but like uh, when Zod looks up at him, he's like, what would you do? Like you were raised by a farm? Like
Yeah.
it's just like, why would you do that?
That's what's so frustrating about
Yeah,
that movie
no.
is that it gets things so close to right and then veers so far off course.
But that Kryptonian issue was very poignant at the end because they finally
Yeah.
see where he's coming from as they're dying. It was so sweet too.
Yeah, and they also sort of
As they're just holding.
they also sort of get what they want to. Like Clark and Superman and those Kryptonians have to kind of agree to disagree because they come from such different places, and they see themselves. They're never going to not see themselves as superior and want to rule because that's how they were raised and that's the planet that they grew up on. And so Superman sends them to the Phantom Zone, and they get to. It's basically the to rule in hell thing. It's basically Kirk sending Khan to SETI Alpha 5. It's that whole thing. Like, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. But Morrison is great at creating what look like these, like we were talking about with Lex, these kind of two-dimensional evil mustache-twirling villains. We get to have the fun of that, but then also give them a spark of personhood and say, oh yeah, but there's something recognizable about these people as well. And at the end, we don't have to hate them, even though. We don't ever love those characters, but we don't have to hate them.
And I love how Superman's such a patient adversary. You know, you think about superheroes just punishing evil, and he's really just, like I said at the beginning, calm and patient, and wants to teach the villains the error of his ways. Even with Lex, he's just like, you could save the world, man. Like, if you weren't so just vain and jealous.
Well, and I think it's impossible for Superman to completely hate Lex because there's this other side of him, sort of, that he gets to see when he's being Clark. Because Lex likes Clark because he's nothing like Superman.
I love that. He's like, if you try hard, you could even look like Superman. You could get Lois Lane.
Yeah, it's hilarious. But like, he likes Clark because he's Superman's opposite
my favorite issue.
in every way, and he's like, you're just a person, and you don't see yourself as above everyone. And it's funny because some of the things that Lex is seeing in Clark is stuff that is present in Superman that he should like about Superman, but doesn't understand because he's just too jealous.
Yeah, and I love the drawn eyebrow thing. He's like, hold on a second.
Oh yeah, that whole thing about how like 60% of men like try to shave their eyebrows such where they look more like Superman, and then he's like, Clark, you do that to look like Superman. He's like, no, I'm Superman.
But yeah, man, I think, like you said, the ideas of the story and just the larger than life myth of the characters and those kind of themes, I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Especially when Morrison writes these DC characters, because I don't know if you know, he views it as kind of like a modern myth, like a Greek pantheon.
Right.
Like Superman is kind of Zeus, Batman is Hades, Aquaman is Poseidon. Like he writes those characters like that, especially with his Justice League.
Yeah,
but
and he makes them larger than life, and he brings some humanity to them, but he's not trying to Marvelify them like some folks have come in and attempted to do, which is interesting because Morrison, writes some decent Marvel stuff too, but I think he is kind of more naturally primed for DC, for those kinds of characters, and I think Morrison is really important in some of the stuff he did for DC in bringing us back to that, because I think when Morrison comes to DC, well, I mean, he's there in the 80s, but especially like well after that, when he has kind of a renaissance in the early 2000s, I think he ends up, or I guess late 90s, early 2000s, Morrison, I think, is one of the guys that's really important in helping it to get out of that identity crisis where DC wants so badly to look like Marvel in being the world we live in, but with superheroes in it, and there's always been a good reason for both of them, which is why it always drives me crazy when people feel like they have to pick Marvel or DC over the... It's like, well, but you come to those for different things. And these days, in like the kind of post-rebirth era, I think DC is a lot closer to that than it used to be. I don't know that Bendis is helping, but I think that at least for the last few years we've kind of gotten back to that a little bit. 52 wanted to Marvel it up again, to some degree.
Yeah,
which is ironic because Morrison came in and was doing Superman there, and I think maybe fighting that a little bit, but also maybe also doing a little bit of that. I don't know. That's an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah, Morrison's the guy you don't put on an ongoing. You just let him do his own stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you.
That's the thing we should talk about too, is that this obviously had to be an out-of-continuity thing, partly because you're telling a story about Superman sort of dying. I, by the way, love that we've got a Death of Superman here that's not Doomsday, but we gotta throw Doomsday in. And we do
I never thought about it like that.
We do it in like the goofiest, corniest way possible, and I love it, where like, of all people, Jimmy Olsen becomes Doomsday.
Jimmy Olsen is awesome in this story, by the way. He's like the coolest Jimmy Olsen. For one, he doesn't, get shot in the face for no reason as soon as he's introduced.
Yeah, there's that. No, he's a lot of fun in this, and it's unabashedly traditional Jimmy Olsen. Like, not only does Grant Morrison think Superman's cool, he thinks everybody in Superman's lore is cool, and he doesn't have to reinvent anybody. So, like, that reconstruction thing, he's doing with everybody. This is Perry White from the 50s, and this is Lois Lane from the 70s, and this is Jimmy Olsen going all the way back. And he's not golly gee whiz because we don't say that anymore, but he's as close to that as you're gonna get. And by the end, when he puts on the rainbow coat, I just want him to keep the rainbow coat. I just want like Jimmy Olsen with the rainbow coat forever because it's hilarious.
Yeah, you could buy that this is like Superman's pal because he keeps up with him. And it's as silly as that issue is. It's really kind of emotional when he's I think it's like Black Kryptonite or whatever, and he's evil. And then Jimmy is like beating him, and he's like, I don't want to die or something. I feel like that's the real Superman coming out, because he's dying, and it's it's kind of like his feelings and stuff, and it's really kind of emotional.
Well, it's sad when he goes bad because you've always got that question and things like this, and of course Smallville did this a lot. You've always got that question of how much of it, and it's actually specifically with Black Kryptonite, but
really,
but how much of it is just a substance that's altering your personality and making you do things you'd never do, and how much of it is bringing out something that deeply is actually in you. And there is that question there a little bit where it's like, does Superman sometimes get irritated with Jimmy Olsen because he relies on him too much and he's constantly pressing the signal watch and he's like, you dumb kid, just deal with it yourself. Like, I want to think that there's like a tiny smidgen of truth to that, like not so far that Superman becomes this real morally ambiguous character. But again, Superman being the embodiment of perfection as close as he is needs to be hard because he needs to still be a human being that has to struggle to make that happen. And so he's got to have some fallacies. He's got to make mistakes. And I want to think that there really was a part of him that just sometimes Jimmy Olsen is irritating.
Yeah, that's always difficult to tell when a character's like under the influence of something. But I think you have a point.
And it's talked about, so I think that's what's going on. But and Superman is something of an unreliable narrator in this, where he will tell people, "No, I'm fine," and then you got to read into that a little bit and be like, "Okay, but how are you feeling, really, Superman?"
He's just trying to maintain face.
But yeah, Doomsday Jimmy Olsen is like the most Jeff Loeb thing in this. Can we all agree with that? That's just a Jeff Loeb idea. Put in something a lot better than anything Jeff Loeb ever wrote. Sorry, Jeff Loeb, but it's just true. And because Jeff Loeb loved messing around with Doomsday. He's got a Kryptonite Doomsday in his Superman Batman run, and he's got like the army of Doomsdays.
Really?
Yeah.
I never read that stuff.
It's hokey. I mean, because he likes to go to this kind of stuff also, but it doesn't have like the sophistication and the edge that Morrison
Yeah.
puts on it that makes it more valid. So it ends up like if Loeb did Doomsday Jimmy Olsen, that's just the gimmick. That's just, you're supposed to like that because it's silly and it's weird. And when Morrison does it, there's always something a little bit more beneath it. When Loeb does it, it's almost like he's trying to. I don't mean to throw Loeb under the bus right now, but that read so Loeb to me. It seems like sometimes when he does a thing like that, especially in Superman Batman, it's like he's holding up a neon sign saying, "This is cool, right? Like, you all love this, right? Isn't this so cool?" And when Morrison does it, he goes, "You think this is stupid, right? But I'm gonna make you love it," and that's the difference.
Yeah, he does that a lot. I mean, he did that with his Batman run with Batmite. It almost feels like he's apple picking, Superman's history and just making this beautiful pie and just showing like, this is why this is good. But yeah, even in the title, like All-Star Superman sounds kind of dumb, but it literally means, what if he was a star? Like, what if he was the sun? And they kind of made the double entendre and stuff like that. Because All-Star was a line in DC Comics back in the 40s, I think, and it's really just getting the best creators to work on iconic characters. So it means that, but it also means like, no, this guy literally is a star, almost on the level of like, I don't know, the Dalai Lama or something like that, a benign god.
I'm really glad you thought of that, because I'm always read too much into titles guy, and I didn't think of that. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Because like when Miller did it, it didn't really mean anything.
This is a very different story than
yes, it is.
All-Star Batman and Robin. Eat a rat, kid.
Wouldn't it be great? Paint myself yellow. Wouldn't it be great if that Batman and this Superman met?
Oh God. I don't think that Batman lives in this world.
No, he doesn't. But multiverse, whatever. But like that's matter and antimatter, is what that is.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I can't say enough about this stuff. I love the story.
Kareem, any other? We're at about an hour. Any other major stuff that we didn't get to? Any big elements any issues we didn't talk about? I feel like we touched on every issue somewhere here or there. We didn't really talk about Lois Lane with her 24 hours of being Superman.
Yeah, I thought that was really, like, you need that because we all kind of have the narrative distance of like, Superman's unrelatable. That's the common thing that everyone says, and you kind of need to put that in the narrative and have someone have his powers. I love how tired she is at the end.
Yeah.
And even Lex at the end, like, he sees all of time as one and stuff like that, and just how things work. And he kind of gets outside of his cruelness for a second.
That's really funny. He turns into Dr. Manhattan,
but yeah,
it makes him less cynical. That's amazing.
Well, that's a testament to these different creators, right? Because Alan Moore, right, he goes in the realism point, which I don't want to say that would realistically happen, but you know what I mean. And then Grant Morrison goes into the kind of idealistic fictional version of, what if we didn't ruin ourselves?
Yeah.
What if we aspired to be something better? So yeah.
And both are landing on human truths. They both ring true.
Yeah.
That's why they're both wonderful.
Yeah. And I think they're interesting spectrums too. Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. They're both wizards, by the way. And then one has long hair and one's bald. You can go into all these kind of theories yourself.
Well, and we know Morrison has a really interesting relationship with drugs. I don't know that about Alan Moore, but I've always made that assumption.
Morrison did a lot of drugs, but Alan Moore, I think, did too, but not as much as Morrison. Fun fact, Alan Moore doesn't like Grant Morrison.
Really?
They have this interesting rivalry. Alan Moore views him as sort of a copycat, almost.
Oh, interesting. I thought you were going to say he just didn't take his storytelling seriously because he was like, too positive or whatever.
No, they have this big rivalry, and Grant Morrison's like, I was already writing comics when you were writing comics. Like, I'm not looking at you. But anyway.
Weird. Well, and that's the thing. In the mid '80s, there was a lot of the same stuff in the air. Like there were a lot of people writing about similar things and writing things that looked really similar. Like if you look at, I'm not saying it even looks rip-offy, but when you go look at Doom Patrol, there's some Watchmen in Doom Patrol. It's weird, but like there's no way he was stealing them. Like,
I mean, a lot of that stuff revolutionized comics. It's impossible to not look at Watchmen when you're doing superhero comics.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of immovable. I mean, my Mountain Rushmore of comics, not mine, but objectively speaking, I think if we're going to do this real quick, Eisner, Moore, Stan Lee, and Todd McFarlane. These are the kind of guys that just made waves. Not mine personally, but I think it's just you can't get around Watchmen and Moore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think Grant Morrison.
I mean, I would almost want to make two different ones if you did that, right? Like, you'd almost want one for writers and one for artists, because, like, it's really hard not to put Kirby on that, but yeah.
Well, I would make a case that Kirby belongs in place of Stan Lee, like me, but I think Stan Lee was more influential as far as the industry is concerned.
Oh, okay. If you're talking about industry people, that's absolutely right. Yeah, but I mean, like, I have a hard time with and this is funny coming from me, but like I have a hard time with a Rushmore that has McFarlane on it, not Kirby, because like McFarlane's important as an artist and as an industry guy. So if you're putting those two things together, absolutely. But like,
I just mean the industry is considered, not the creators.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Well, that.
But anyways, All-Star.
No, that's I'm glad you mentioned that. The whole Mount Rushmore thing is the thing that we've done in the Secret Society with.
Oh wow. I missed that.
Did you miss that? I thought that's why you brought it up. I thought you were in on that. And we didn't do it with creators. What did we do it with? Maybe it was I can't remember. We did it with something, but we did that recently.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, Kareem, thanks for making me read this again. Because it's been a long time, and I had forgotten some of the really fun stuff that's in this, and it's hard to read this and just not, get in a good mood and feel good about things and. Remember what you love about comics, right? Like,
this is great. This is great.
It's hard to imagine like comics existing without it.
Yeah.
That's part of why it's weird that it comes as late as it does. Even 05 or 06, it's like that. I start Geekvolution 3 years after this comes out, and that's weird in my brain. Like, it feels like this had to have existed at least 10 years before that, and it didn't.
Yeah, and this is great. Particularly if you're down in the dumps and stuff, and you don't really, you're kind of having superhero fatigue. This is great to remind you why these characters matter.
Yeah.
And it just, you walk away with a respect for Superman, even if that's not your guy. You kind of get it. So yeah.
And Morrison's great for just a refresher on what heroism is in general. Going back and reading something a little bit more straightforward from Morrison, I was reminded of Klaus, which I think is probably my favorite Morrison thing now. And I don't know if you've looked at Klaus, but it also has that, where you go look at that and it reminds you, oh yeah, that's why we like superheroes.
Yeah, Morrison, if you study the guy like I do, he has this philosophy of we have it in ourselves to pick ourselves up, all our flaws, we can become, lowercase gods, lowercase g gods, like Superman in the story, not like overlording stuff like that.
Yeah.
Even when Superman passes the Kandor people to the cancer kids,
yeah,
I think was just like indicative of just what the story is trying to do. Morrison believes that a lot. He studies a lot of Eastern philosophy and a lot of Western culture as far as superhero comics is concerned. He's shied away from because he thinks we've gotten a little too cynical.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Watchmen earlier. He thinks we bit a little bit too much of that pie, and we need to be going the other way. But I thanks for inviting me, man. This is my favorite superhero story of all time.
I'm glad we got to talk about it. Like I said, it only goes downhill from here. But Kareem, come back again soon, and let's maybe do something Batman or something next time. I don't know what yet, but
Batman's my guy. So
Well, I just want to ask Kareem Batman questions, but I'll do that later. Everybody, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you had a good time. Kareem, this is great. I really hope you'll come back and do it with me again. And you guys leave your comments. Let us know what you think about All-Star Superman. Is it one of your favorite things? Is it your absolute favorite thing, like Kareem? Do you think that last issue is maybe a little bit too odd, even for Morrison, like I do? What do you think? Leave your comments. Let us know. And we will see you again next time on the Vast Anomalous Comic Vault. I was Captain Logan. This was Kareem. And happy reading, everybody. Bye.